It's funny, isn't it? How time has a way of showing you the truth about people. The memories are still so vivid, like snapshots of a life that now feels distant, yet so close. I remember the days when I used to drive that old truck of mine, the one they loved to mock. It wasn't much, just a beat-up thing with rust spots and a rattle that made my bones ache on long drives. But it was mine, and it had carried me through more than most people would ever understand. I didn't mind the creaks and groans. It was a part of me. I'd worked hard for it, earned it, with the sweat of my brow. Yet to my children, to my in-laws, it was nothing but a joke. I can still hear their laughter, mocking the way I'd park it outside their shiny new houses, their fresh, polished cars parked side by side like trophies of some game I never understood. "Is that your ride?" they'd chuckle, as if I'd brought a relic from another time. They never thought much of me, never cared to ask about the stories I carried, the struggles that had built me. I'd sit there, silent, letting their words wash over me. Their world was so full of success, of things I couldn't quite grasp. But that truck, that old truck, had always been enough for me. I could count on it when the rest of the world seemed so fickle. What they didn't see, what they never cared to understand, was the pride I took in it. They'd laugh at the dent on the fender, the mismatched seats, the paint peeling at the edges. But it had carried me through good days and bad. It had been with me when my life had crumbled, when my heart had broken into pieces that no amount of money could fix. Yet they couldn't see past the surface, past the humble exterior. They couldn't see the strength in the old, worn parts of me. There were times I thought about confronting them, about letting them see the work I had put into this life, the sacrifices I had made for them. But those moments never came. Instead, I would just sit quietly, watching them laugh, their faces lit by the warmth of their privilege. It was as though they had forgotten the sacrifices that had come before their easy lives, that I had worked to give them what they had. But they didn't see that. They didn't care. I was just the old man with the broken-down truck, invisible and irrelevant in their bright world. And it hurt, more than I cared to admit. I can't say when it started, when that quiet anger began to grow in me, but I can tell you it was there, buried under the weight of those mockings. It wasn't loud, it wasn't brash, it was a slow burn. Something that simmered in the background as I quietly observed the people I once loved so much drift further and further away. My children, once the center of my world, were now too busy with their own lives to care about mine. And the in-laws? They barely even spoke to me anymore, content with their assumptions of who I was. The truck was the perfect symbol of my place in their eyes, small, insignificant, and forgotten. But I wasn't forgotten, not by me, not by the life I had lived. The truth was, I had something they didn't understand, something they would never see until it was too late. And that was where the story really began. It wasn't just the truck, it was everything. They thought I couldn't see it, thought I wouldn't notice how they whispered when I entered the room, or how their eyes would roll as I tried to share anything about my life. But I noticed. I always noticed. The way their smiles froze when I spoke, the awkward silences that followed my presence. Each one felt like a needle in my chest, sharp and biting. The worst part was that it wasn't even subtle. No, they didn't even try to hide it anymore. One afternoon, I overheard my son and daughter-in-law talking, just outside the kitchen window. I had come home early thinking of surprising them with a gift, something simple but meaningful. Instead, I stood there, frozen, as I listened to their words drift on the wind. "You know," my son was saying, "I don't know how he doesn't see it. The truck, the house, everything. He's just stuck in the past, living in some kind of nostalgic dream. He can't keep up. It's like he's living in a different world. His wife laughed, a short, bitter sound. You can't blame him, though. That truck is all he's got left. I mean, it's kind of sad, really, like a joke, right? I felt my throat tighten as I stood there, hidden by the curtains, clutching the box in my hands. The gift, the one I thought would bring us closer, suddenly felt so pointless, so trivial. The laughter in her voice stung more than I expected. The old truck, my most consistent companion, was a symbol of everything I had given them, the late nights, the years of hard work, and they were laughing at it. Laughing at me. You know, it's not just that, my son continued. It's everything. He doesn't get that times have changed. How much longer are we supposed to pretend like his way of doing things still works, like he's got some wisdom to share? It's embarrassing. Embarrassing? I never thought I'd hear that word aimed at me. I always believed that family, no matter how different their lives became, would still see the worth in each other, that they'd appreciate the quiet things, the sacrifices, the lessons learned the hard way. But no, they saw me as nothing more than an outdated relic. I wasn't a father anymore. I wasn't a part of their future. I was a burden. It hurt more than I could admit, especially hearing my son, the one I had raised, speak about me in such a way. I had worked so hard, given everything so they could have the life they wanted, and now I was nothing more than an inconvenience? Their dismissive comments, their cruel jokes weren't just about the truck. They were about everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed for them. I could hear the bitterness in their voices, the judgment that seemed to seep into every word. How had I gone from being their hero, their protector, to a nuisance they couldn't wait to get rid of? Where had I gone wrong? When had I stopped being enough? The realization hit me hard, like a cold wave crashing over me. The family I had worked so hard to build, the life I had poured myself into, was slipping away. And worse yet, I was invisible to them. To my children, I had become someone to be tolerated. To my in-laws, I was a joke. It didn't stop there. The more I reflected, the more I saw the signs. The subtle eye rolls when I spoke, the way they avoided my calls, the way they glanced at their phones when I walked into a room. Everything pointed to the same truth. I wasn't part of their world anymore. I had outlived my usefulness, and now they were moving on without me. And I began to wonder, how long had they been talking about me like this behind my back? How many more laughs had they shared at my expense, at the life I had built with my own hands? How much of their disdain was truly hidden in plain sight? My sacrifices, my hard work, it all felt like nothing now, just a weight dragging me down, while they soared higher and higher in their shiny new world. I left the box on the kitchen counter that day. I couldn't bear to face them, not with the knowledge of what I had just heard hanging heavy in my chest. I didn't even want to speak to them. I couldn't even bring myself to tell them how much it hurt, because they wouldn't care. They'd just brush it off as another one of my old-fashioned ways, just like they always did. And in that moment, I knew. I knew that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I would never fit into their future. So, I decided to stop trying. If they couldn't see me, couldn't appreciate me for who I was, then I would stop wasting my time seeking their approval. But what they didn't realize was that I still had a plan. A quiet, deliberate one. I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. It's strange how silence can feel so loud. The years I spent raising my children, supporting their dreams, putting everything I had into giving them the best I could offer, it all seemed to fade into the background, as if it had never really mattered. I remember the late nights,
the long days working just to make ends meet. Also, they could have the education I never had. I remember the pride I felt when I saw them graduate, when they stood tall in their caps and gowns, knowing that, despite everything, they had made it. But now, years later, all of that felt like it belonged to someone else's life, a life I no longer seemed to be part of. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us. It wasn't obvious at first. It was the small things, the things I would have once brushed off, but now felt like a constant sting. When my daughter called, it was always about her new apartment or her latest vacation plans, never about how I was doing, never asking if I needed anything. When I'd call my son, the conversations were short, almost robotic. He'd tell me about work, how he was busy, how things were good, but the warmth that used to fill our talks had disappeared. The spaces between his words had grown wider, colder, and I kept asking myself, when did this happen? When did I become a shadow in their lives? One day it was particularly bad. I had picked up the phone to call my daughter. I hadn't heard from her in a few days, and the silence between us was growing. She answered quickly, but there was a noticeable distance in her voice. "Hey, Dad, I'm in the middle of something right now," she said. There was a rushed tone to her words, as if she had somewhere to be, something more important than a conversation with me. "Just wanted to check in," I said, forcing the words out. "How have you been?" "I'm good, Dad, really. I've got a lot going on with work and, well, you know how it is." Her voice trailed off, as if she was already thinking about the next thing. There was no curiosity, no real interest in how I was. She didn't ask about the truck, or the house, or any of the little details I used to share with her. I could feel the hurt, subtle but sharp, cutting through the gap in our conversation. How would it come to this? How had I gone from being someone they looked up to, someone they needed, to a name on a phone screen? Just another call they had to take. I sat there staring at the phone for a moment after we hung up. I wanted to call back, to ask why things felt so distant. But I didn't. What good would it do? What good was there in trying to fix something that felt so broken, so far beyond repair? I couldn't help but wonder, when did the respect vanish? I had given so much, put every ounce of myself into raising them, supporting their ambitions, watching them grow into who they were. Yet, here I was, wondering where the love had gone. They were busy with their lives now, with their shiny new careers and their fresh, bustling worlds. They didn't need me anymore, and I had to face the truth. I wasn't part of their future. I wasn't a priority anymore. The truth stung. I had sacrificed so much for them. I had put my own dreams aside to make sure they could chase theirs. I'd worked 2 jobs at one point just to send my son to college, had sold the little things I had for their new clothes, their new toys. I'd watched them grow into adults, proud of them every step of the way, believing that they would never forget what it cost to get them there. But they had forgotten, and in doing so, I had become irrelevant in their world. Still, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. The pride I had, the pride that had kept me going all these years, held me back. I couldn't beg for attention. I couldn't demand affection. That wasn't who I was. So, I stayed silent, bearing the hurt deep inside. But beneath that silence, Something was shifting. A quiet storm was brewing. I had been dismissed, yes. I had been forgotten, yes. But that didn't mean I had nothing left to offer. I may have been invisible to them, but I wasn't invisible to myself. My value didn't come from their approval. I wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. But that didn't make the ache go away. No, the ache lingered like a cold wind that wouldn't leave no matter how tightly you wrapped yourself in warmth. And I wondered how much longer I could ignore it before it became something else entirely, before it became the fuel for something bigger that would make them see me again. I hadn't expected to see him again, not after all these years. I was out running errands, something I did almost by rote now. My day is marked by the same routines. It was a quiet afternoon, the sun starting to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows over the streets. I was walking out of the hardware store when I bumped into John, a man I had known in my younger days. He used to work in construction, just like I had. I remember how we'd talk shop while we worked side by side, sharing stories about our families and our plans. But that was before life had pulled us in different directions, before I had settled into my routine and he had found his own way to the top.
"John?" I said, almost not believing my own voice. It had been over 10 years since I last saw him. "Is that you, Jim?" He smiled, his handshake firm as ever. His clothes were different now, slick, modern, the kind of thing I only saw on people who had money to burn. He had a kind of confidence about him that I didn't remember. His eyes were brighter, and his smile seemed to reach a little wider than it used to. We exchanged pleasantries, catching up on the basics, families, jobs, the old neighborhood. But as the conversation went on, it became clear that John was no longer the man I remembered. He was now a successful entrepreneur, the kind of guy who talked about investments and expansion. His words were polished, smooth, like he had learned to make money talk instead of just people. He spoke about his latest business ventures, a chain of stores he had started from scratch, and how much he was expanding. It was impressive, I'll admit. But it wasn't just the business that caught my attention. It was the way he spoke about his success, so effortlessly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Jim, you've got to get out there, man," he said, his tone almost encouraging. "There's so much opportunity, you know? I could show you the ropes. You still got the grit. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I was taken aback. I could see how far he had come. His sharp suit, the car parked across the street, the way he carried himself like a man who had made it, who had everything he needed. And there I was, with my old truck, wearing clothes that had seen better days. My hands were calloused, just like they always had been, but now they felt like they were from another time. I hadn't realized it then, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark, an unfamiliar one, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years, a possibility. After that conversation, I couldn't shake the feeling that had crept in, the nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to change things, that maybe I didn't have to keep driving this old truck and living in a house that had become more of a reminder than a home. I had spent so many years convinced that this was it, that I had reached the limit of my life, that I was just the old man who couldn't keep up. But something John said stirred something deep within me. "You've still got the grit." Those words stuck with me. Maybe I hadn't lost it. Maybe I could still build something, still create something new. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about what John had said. I found myself researching, searching for answers I'd never thought to look for before. It was all so new to me. The world of business, the language of success. I pored over books and articles, watched videos, and learned how people turn their lives around by doing things they'd never considered.
I didn't have the luxury of youth anymore, and I couldn't afford to waste time. But I had something that mattered more: the drive to prove that I still had the power to change. I didn't tell anyone about what I was doing. Not my children, not my in-laws, nobody. It felt strange to keep it to myself, but I was afraid of their mockery, their dismissive attitude. I didn't want to hear them laugh again, didn't want to see the pity in their eyes when they thought I was just wasting my time. So I kept quiet, studying in the dead of night, using the old computer I had kept for years, not knowing exactly where this would take me, but knowing that it was the only direction I could go. I started to put a plan together, small steps at first. I learned about investment strategies, about how to create a business plan, and the kind of sacrifices it would take. I realized how much I had been ignoring, how much I had been blinded by my own doubts. It was almost like waking up from a long sleep. I could feel the excitement building, the possibility taking shape. And yet, I had to stay careful, stay quiet. Every moment I spent learning felt like a secret, a hidden part of me that I could only nurture in silence. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was no longer just the man with the truck. I wasn't the one they pitied, the one they saw as stuck in the past. I was something else now. A man who had discovered something deep within himself, something that had been waiting to emerge. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, the drive to prove them wrong. The way they had laughed at me, at my truck, at my life, at the person I had become, had ignited something in me. And while they still saw me as the same old man they'd always known, I was no longer that person. I had started to build something that would change everything. The future I once thought was lost, slipping through my fingers like sand, now felt like something I could reach out and touch. I had a purpose again. I wasn't just waiting for things to happen. I was making them happen. And I knew this: the best revenge would be the one they would never see coming. It was time to show them who I truly was. I knew that if I was going to change my life, I couldn't make any sudden moves. The last thing I needed was to give them a reason to laugh harder, to fuel the mockery they so easily threw my way. So I played my part, the quiet, invisible man in the corner of the room, the one they no longer considered a threat. It was like a game now, but one I was learning to play with every passing day. I kept my plans to myself, hidden away like precious seeds planted deep in the soil, waiting for the right moment to sprout. Every day I spent hours reading books, articles, watching videos, anything that would give me the edge. I immersed myself in business strategies, learning about entrepreneurship, how to scale small investments, and the subtle art of negotiation. The language of success, once foreign to me, became a part of my everyday thinking. I learned about business structures, about how companies were built from the ground up. The more I learned, the more determined I became. There was no turning back now. I had to be strategic, careful, patient. I started small, with tiny investments, almost laughably small to anyone who might have been watching. But to me, they were the first steps of a much bigger plan. I found a few online trading platforms and began dabbling with low-risk investments. Nothing too flashy, nothing that would draw attention. It felt like a secret world, a world I could control. My hands, rough from years of hard labor, were now moving in a different direction, typing on keyboards and clicking through screens, navigating a landscape I never thought I would step into. Every penny I earned went into this quiet venture, building on itself, multiplying like the snowball effect I'd read about. I was living frugally, saving every dime, while pretending to be the same old man they thought I was, outdated, irrelevant, insignificant. They never suspected a thing. The children continued with their lives, indifferent to mine, focused on their own problems, their own ambitions. My son had a new project he was working on, something to impress his boss. My daughter, always the planner, was busy with her wedding arrangements, planning a day that would cost more than I had ever spent on anything in my life. They hardly looked at me anymore. They didn't have to. I was just there, in the background, unnoticed. But in the background, something was stirring. I was quietly building. I didn't let on how much I was learning, how much I was absorbing. They saw my lack of ambition as weakness, but I knew better. They didn't realize that beneath the surface, I was plotting my next move. Every dollar I invested, every piece of knowledge I gained was laying the groundwork for something bigger. And I began to feel the stirrings of power again, a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, the in-laws became more dismissive. It was subtle at first, a change in tone when they spoke to me, a casual disregard for my opinions when I did offer them. My daughter-in-law would ask me about my day, but her eyes would glaze over as soon as I started talking. My son, when I tried to offer advice, would nod politely and then change the subject, as if my words were no longer relevant. I could see it in their eyes, that silent judgment they never even tried to hide anymore. They didn't believe in me. They thought I was stuck. But the truth was, I was the one who was watching them now. I saw how they lived, how they spent, how they treated people around them. They thought their lives were perfect. Big houses, shiny cars, vacations to places I never even dreamed of. But the more I watched, the more I realized how empty it all was. They were consumed by appearances, by what others thought of them, constantly trying to prove something to a world that didn't care. They didn't realize that in their pursuit of validation, they had lost sight of the things that truly mattered. They had no idea that the person they were laughing at was about to rise above them all. There were times when the weight of it all became too much. There were moments when I wanted to lash out, to scream at them for all the years they had taken from me, for all the years I had sacrificed without so much as a thank you. But I kept quiet. I held my tongue. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes I had made before. The time for that had passed. No, I would play the long game now. I would be patient. Let them believe I was nothing. Let them dismiss me as the old fool with his outdated truck. They had no idea that I was becoming something more. That with every step I took, I was outpacing them. I spent my evenings on the phone with other entrepreneurs, asking questions, networking in the quietest way possible. I never let them know what I was doing. I couldn't afford to. There were risks in this game, but I wasn't going to let fear stop me. I had made sacrifices all my life. Now it was time to make an investment in myself. I knew that when the time was right, I would strike. I would show them all. And when they saw the truth, when they saw what I had built, quietly, from the ground up, they would regret every laugh, every sneer. But for now, I had to remain in the background, unnoticed. Let them think they knew me. Let them laugh at my old truck. Let them dismiss my quiet resilience. The storm was coming, and when it would hit like nothing they had ever expected. It happened almost silently, the way things tend to when you've been building towards something for so long. After months of research, countless hours spent learning, negotiating, and maneuvering in the shadows, I finally did it. I purchased a small business, nothing too grand, nothing that would turn heads at first glance. But to me, it was everything. It wasn't just the deal itself, the paperwork or the logistics. It was the first tangible proof that my quiet work had paid off. I had crossed a line I never thought I would. I had taken something intangible, something that only existed in my mind, and turned it into reality. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. I had done something for myself, something that wasn't for anyone else, and it felt good. But the feeling was fleeting. Almost as soon as I made the purchase, the weight of it all settled in. I couldn't share it with anyone. Not with my children, not with my in-laws. I couldn't risk it. The mockery, the indifference, it was all still there, lurking beneath the surface, ready to pounce if they found out what I had done. They would never understand. They would never see it for what it was, the beginning of something bigger, something I had built for myself, by myself. To them, it would just be another thing to laugh at, another joke to be made. So I kept it hidden. Quietly, I began to work on my new venture, piece by piece, learning as I went, growing into a new role that felt as unfamiliar as it was thrilling. I didn't tell anyone, not my son, who was still preoccupied with his projects and his important work. Not my daughter, who was so caught up in her upcoming wedding that she wouldn't have noticed if I'd bought the entire block. They didn't care. Not really. They were too wrapped up in their own worlds to see what was happening right in front of them. They didn't even notice the change in me, the subtle shift in my demeanor. How could they? They were too busy with their own lives to care about mine. I could see it in their eyes whenever I was around. They looked through me as if I was invisible. Just the old man with the truck, the one who no longer mattered. My son would nod and say, "Hey, Dad," when I called, but there was no real warmth in it, no genuine connection. My daughter, as always, would offer her polite, distant greetings, but there was no true engagement. I began to realize something as I observed them, something I hadn't fully understood until now.
They didn't respect me. Not the way they should. They had no interest in my life, no desire to share in anything I was doing. It was as if, in their eyes, I had become a shadow, something to be tolerated at best. They didn't see the effort, the years of work I had put into providing for them, into shaping the lives they now lived. And the more I realized this, the more my resolve solidified. I had spent my life giving, sacrificing, building something for them, but they hadn't asked for it. They hadn't appreciated it. They didn't even notice when I was no longer a part of their future. And that, I realized, was my mistake. I had built everything for them, and in doing so, I had neglected myself. But now, with this first win under my belt, I could see the future differently. For the first time in years, I had something that was mine, a business, a foothold in the world I'd once thought I couldn't enter. The old truck, the humble house, they seemed like distant memories now, the remnants of a life I had outgrown. I wasn't that man anymore. I had transformed, without them even realizing it. The quiet pride I felt was something I couldn't share, something that existed only within me. But it was enough. It had to be enough. The family remained oblivious to my success, as I expected. They never noticed the subtle changes in me, the way I carried myself now with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before, the way I was starting to speak differently, to think differently. To them, I was still the same old man they had mocked, the same person they had dismissed. But I wasn't that man anymore. I was building something that didn't need their approval. Every day as I worked on my new business, the more I realized that my success didn't belong to them. It belonged to me, and in some strange way, that made it all the sweeter. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need them to see me. I had learned to stand on my own. The quiet satisfaction of my progress was enough. I continued to watch the family, their lives continuing as if nothing had changed. They were still wrapped up in their own worlds, too self-absorbed to notice the shift in mine. My son's new project, my daughter's wedding plans, they were the same things that had kept them at a distance all these years. They didn't see the storm building just beneath the surface. They didn't realize that the foundation of my life was shifting quietly away from them. And it made me wonder, how long would it take them to notice? Would they ever? Or would I have to show them in the only way that would truly make them understand?
There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that when the time came, they would finally see what I had built. They would see the man I had become, not the man they thought I was. And when that day came, when they finally understood what I had accomplished, they would regret every moment they had taken me for granted. Every time they had laughed in my old truck, my outdated ways, because I had built something they couldn't ignore, and I wasn't finished yet. I had always known that the car dealership was the crown jewel in my plan, the one place that had always symbolized the world that had looked down on me, the place where they had laughed, ridiculed, and dismissed me as just another old man with outdated dreams. They didn't realize it, but that dealership was more than just a business. It was a symbol, a target, a stepping stone to something far greater. It wasn't just the building, the cars on the lot, or the fancy showroom. It was everything that had been built around it. The arrogance of the owners, the air of superiority they carried with every customer that walked through the door. I had seen it all too many times. They never hesitated to laugh behind my back when I walked past their pristine glass windows, my old truck parked just down the street. It was as though they thought I was invisible, as though I wasn't worth their time. To them, I was just a relic of the past. But what they didn't know was that I had been watching, learning, calculating, and now I was ready to make my move. I started with the basics, research. It wasn't enough to simply want the dealership. I needed to understand everything about it. The finances, the business model, the competition, the opportunities for growth. I spent weeks studying the car industry, learning about market trends, analyzing local dealerships, and reviewing the dealership's financial history. I knew it was a gamble, but it wasn't one I was afraid to take. The more I learned, the more confident I became. The dealership, once a symbol of everything they had mocked me about, was beginning to look more and more like the perfect opportunity. But securing financing was no simple task. I had always been good with money, saving, budgeting, making the most of what I had. But this was different. I needed more than just my savings, more than the quiet investments I had been making in the shadows. I needed a business loan, something substantial enough to purchase the dealership outright, and that meant convincing banks and investors that I was a viable candidate for such a large deal. I began with meeting with a few financial advisors, explaining my plan and showing them my research. At first, they were skeptical. Who was I, after all? Just an old man with an old truck, a man they thought had long passed his prime. They looked at my history, my credit score, and my modest savings, and they raised their eyebrows. But they hadn't seen what I had built, the quiet empire I had started to grow in the background. They hadn't seen the long hours I had spent educating myself, networking, gathering the information that would make me a strong candidate. So, I didn't give up. I went back again and again, showing them the numbers, presenting my plan with greater confidence each time. Slowly, their skepticism began to melt away. They started to see what I saw, the potential, the possibility, the opportunity. One by one, I gathered the support I needed. With the loan secured and a business strategy in hand, I set my sights on the dealership once more. This time, I wasn't just an observer. I was a contender. Throughout this process, my family remained completely oblivious. My children, wrapped up in their own lives, were still too busy to notice any changes in mine. My son's project was growing, his career advancing, but he never asked how I was doing, never took a moment to check in. My daughter was knee-deep in wedding plans, and she too had seemed to forget about the man who had raised her. They continued with their lives, laughing at my old truck and dismissing my outdated ways. They never saw what was brewing beneath the surface. They never once questioned why I was so quiet, why I was so focused. They were too caught up in their own stories to care about mine. Even the in-laws, who had once mocked me so openly, had no idea what was happening. They continued to roll their eyes whenever I spoke, always assuming they knew better. They never realized how much I had changed, how much I had grown. Their dismissiveness only fueled my resolve. Every laugh, every patronizing comment became a reminder of what I was building, a life that they would never understand until too late. And then the day came. I stood in front of the dealership, the building I had once driven past with nothing but a truck and a dream. Now I was standing there with a future. It was surreal, almost impossible to believe. The same place they had once mocked me for admiring was now mine. It wasn't just a business acquisition. It was a statement. I wasn't just taking over the dealership. I was taking back the life they had taken from me, my respect, my dignity, and my future. The emotional weight of the moment hit me harder than I expected. For years, I had been the one left behind, the one who I had been quiet about it all, playing the part of the humble, outdated man they had all dismissed so easily. But while they were busy living their lives, consumed by their own petty dramas and ambitions, I was building something. I was putting together the pieces of a life that would no longer be dictated by their ridicule. And now, And now, with the dealership secured, I was on the verge of turning everything upside down. When I finally stood in front of the dealership, looking at the sleek cars lined up in the showroom, the feeling of success was almost overwhelming. The polished chrome, the gleaming windows, the sprawling lot, it was all mine. The very place that had once been a symbol of their mockery now belonged to me. And as I looked around, I could almost hear their voices in my head, the laughter, the snide comments. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea who they had been laughing at. I took a few quiet moments to savor the feeling, to let the magnitude of what I had done settle in. It wasn't just about the cars or the business. It was about the quiet, relentless drive that had brought me here. It was the culmination of everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made, every insult I had endured. This was my moment. But as the initial rush of victory began to fade, the reality of what had happened sank in. I wasn't just taking back what was mine. I was doing it at the expense of the very people who had once been my family. The irony of it hit me hard. It was them, the same ones who had ridiculed me, belittled me, and dismissed me, that I had outbid. It was their defeat that now tasted so sweet, their shame that filled me with quiet satisfaction. I hadn't just earned this victory. I had taken it from them. I had made sure they would never forget how they had underestimated me. The truth was, it felt like a betrayal, not just of them, but of myself. I had spent so many years pouring my heart into building a family, into raising children who would grow up to be proud of me. But somewhere along the way, I had been forgotten. I had been abandoned, laughed at, ignored, and now I was taking back what was mine, what they had taken from me. I hadn't just worked hard for this. I had worked in silence, behind closed doors, while they mocked me. And now, as I stood in front of the dealership, the reality of how far I had come hit me like a weight. I knew they would be surprised, but I didn't know just how deep their shock would run. When the news broke, when they found out that it was me who had bought the dealership, It was like watching a carefully constructed facade crumble before my eyes. They had never considered the possibility that I could outbid them, that I could build something they hadn't even thought to compete for. I could almost feel their disbelief ripple through the air as I watched them react. My son, always so confident in his own abilities, was the first to call. "Dad, what the hell is going on? How did you afford this? You're not serious, are you?" It was clear he didn't believe it. He had always assumed that I was nothing more than a relic of the past, a man who couldn't keep up with the times. To him, I was just the one who still drove the old truck, the one who had been left behind. But now, it was clear. I had left him behind. And the look of shock on his face, the realization that I had done something they could not have imagined, was almost too satisfying. I didn't rush to answer his questions. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of his disbelief settle between us. There was no need to explain myself. He wouldn't understand. None of them would. In the days that followed, the family's reactions were a strange mix of anger, confusion, and shame. My daughter called next, her voice full of disbelief. "I can't believe it," she said. "I mean, I thought you were just, stuck in the past. We never thought you'd be able to." "You thought I couldn't keep up," I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. "Well, here we are." The shame in their voices, the hurt behind their words, it was palpable. They hadn't seen me, not really. They had no idea who I had become, how much I had changed. And now, they were forced to reckon with the reality that I was not the same man they had once dismissed. I kept my responses short, not out of anger, but because I knew there was nothing more to say. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about me, about what I had built from myself, about the quiet pride that I had carried for so long, and about the moment when the tables had finally turned. The emotional high of my victory was tempered by the weight of what had come before. I had worked for years to prove myself, to build something that would stand on its own. But I also knew, deep down, that the only way I had gotten here was by betraying the family I had once hoped would be my greatest support. I had taken their dismissiveness, their lack of respect, and turned it into fuel for something bigger. I had done it alone, just as I had always done things alone. But now, it was time to begin. The dealership, the business, the future, it was all mine. And I wasn't going to let anyone forget who had built it. Not just the business, but the man that I had become. In the silence of my office, I took a moment to look out over the lot, the rows of cars gleaming under the lights. This was my triumph. But I knew that the family who had laughed at me would soon understand the price of their mockery. They would see what I had built, what they had overlooked. And when they did, they would feel the weight of their own shame because they had underestimated me. And now, it was too late to turn back. The dinner was supposed to be a casual family gathering. My daughter's wedding was just around the corner, and I had agreed to join them for one of their regular family nights, a tradition they'd carried on with much less thought for me in recent years. They had their fancy meals, their stories of success and social circles, while I was content to sit quietly at the edge, observing. My son and daughter-in-law were there, along with my wife, who had begun to grow distant herself, consumed by the preparations for the wedding. The atmosphere was light, almost too light, as though they still didn't realize what was looming over them, and they had no idea that tonight, everything would change. They hadn't noticed, not once, that my quiet presence had slowly become something more. For months, I had lived in their shadow, an invisible figure, the man with the truck and the outdated ways they all mocked. But tonight, I wasn't the invisible man. I wasn't the one they dismissed. Tonight, they would see me differently, whether they wanted to or not. They would see what I had built, and they would see the price of their disregard. "So, Dad," my son said, his voice filled with an almost condescending cheer, "how's the old truck doing? Still hanging on to that relic?" I didn't flinch. I'd expected the jab, the same mocking tone that had become second nature to them over the years. The laughter from my daughter-in-law followed, a low, dismissive sound, the same attitude, the same disregard. They didn't know the storm that had been brewing, the quiet transformation that I had undergone while they carried on with their lives. And tonight I would be the one to shift the ground beneath them. "I've done a little more than hang on to that truck," I said calmly, placing my fork down and looking each of them in the eye. "In fact, I've done a lot more than any of you ever thought possible." The words hung in the air. The silence that followed, thick with unspoken questions. My daughter shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. My son, too, seemed uncertain. They didn't know where this was going, but they could feel it now. The quiet man they had once underestimated was about to speak the truth they had ignored for too long. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. I wasn't angry. Not yet, at least. What I felt was something quieter, deeper. It was the realization that, for all the years I had sacrificed, I had never once asked for their gratitude. But now the time had come for them to understand why those sacrifices mattered. You've all had your successes, your big projects, your weddings, your milestones.
And I've been right here, quietly supporting, quietly giving. I've raised you both, put you through school, worked harder than you'll ever know to give you the opportunities you take for granted. But none of you, I paused, letting the words land. None of you ever took a moment to understand who I am. You mocked me, you dismissed me, and you thought I was nothing. But I've been building something that you never saw. There was a palpable shift in the room. My son opened his mouth, but no words came out. My daughter, once so confident in her plans, suddenly seemed small, vulnerable. She had never looked at me like this before, her eyes full of something I hadn't seen in years.
I continued, my voice steady but laced with the quiet fury of years of being underestimated. "I've spent my life taking care of this family. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me. You stopped respecting me. You thought I was just the old man who drove a truck, too old to be taken seriously. You never asked how I was doing. You didn't ask if I needed help. You assumed I'd always be the one giving. You didn't notice that I had dreams too. And when I started building something for myself, you didn't see it. You didn't care. Well, now you're going to see it." My son's face had turned pale, his jaw tightening. My daughter had her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes avoiding mine. My daughter-in-law shifted uncomfortably, but I could see her holding back. She hadn't expected this. They were all trapped in the same moment now. The moment when they realized that they had been wrong. The moment when the man they had dismissed as outdated and irrelevant had become the one they couldn't ignore. "You didn't even see it coming, did you?" I said, my voice quieter now, but no less powerful. "You didn't see how I was working. You didn't see how I was learning, growing, changing. You didn't think a man like me could build something on his own. But I did. I bought the dealership you mocked, the one you thought I couldn't afford, the one you laughed about behind my back. The room fell completely silent. My son's face was a picture of shock. The realization slowly hit him, and I could see the struggle in his eyes as he tried to come to terms with what I had just revealed. My daughter was the first to speak, her voice a whisper. "Wait, what? You mean you bought the dealership?" I nodded slowly, allowing the weight of my words to settle. "Yes, it's mine now. I didn't need your approval to do it. I didn't need anyone to believe in me. I did it myself. And now you'll understand the cost of your indifference." The guilt on their faces was undeniable. It wasn't just about the dealership. It was about everything I had quietly endured for years. It was about the sacrifices they had never seen, the love and care that had always been there, even when they were too distracted to notice. You see, I've learned something over the years: the value of respect, the importance of family. But respect isn't just given, it's earned, and you'll learn to earn it now. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of everything that had been unsaid for years. They sat there, unable to speak, staring at the man they had once dismissed, the one who had been their provider, their support, and now their equal. It was my daughter who finally broke the silence. I'm sorry, Dad. I never realized." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "This isn't about apologies. It's about understanding what really matters. The time you spend with the people who love you, the respect you show to the ones who've always been there for you, that's what matters." I looked at them one last time, my calm resolve settling over me like a mantle. "You're all free to live your lives as you see fit, but now you know, no one is invisible. Not anymore."
And as I stood up, quietly excusing myself from the table, I could feel the shift in the air, the quiet realization that everything had changed. The family that once ignored me was now forced to reckon with the man I had become. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the respect I had long deserved. The hum of the dealership was soothing, a steady backdrop to the chaos that had unfolded in my life over the past few months. The cars on the lot were polished and shining, the showrooms pristine and filled with customers who admired the quality, the experience, the trust that now defined this place. It was thriving, not just because of the business I had built, but because of the quiet triumph that echoed through every inch of it. As I walked down the aisle of the showroom, the fluorescent lights gleamed down, casting long shadows that danced beneath my feet. The salespeople greeted me with polite smiles. The mechanics waved from the garage, their eyes acknowledging me with the quiet respect I had longed for. I paused for a moment, letting the weight of the moment sink in. This was it, the culmination of everything I had worked for, everything I had endured. The laughter, the mockery, the dismissals, all of it had led me here, to a place where I stood in silence, powerful but unspoken. I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had brought me to this point. Was it justice I sought, or was it something else? Was this revenge, or had it been a slow-burning fire of hurt and betrayal that drove me to build something in defiance of those who had mocked me? The question lingered, almost like a quiet echo in the back of my mind. Part of me wanted to believe that it was all about righting a wrong, that my success was a noble form of retribution for those who had laughed at my humble beginnings. But deep down, I knew it was more complicated than that. What I had done, what I had built, wasn't just for them. It was for me. It was for the quiet years I had spent feeling invisible,
unappreciated, overlooked. It was for the times when I had quietly supported, never asking for anything in return, and had watched as the world moved on without me. It was a way to reclaim something I had lost along the way, my sense of self, my dignity, my power. But as I walked through the dealership, watching the cars come and go, seeing customers happy with their purchases, I found something deeper than revenge. There was peace in the silence of it all. The satisfaction wasn't in their regret, though I knew it was coming. It wasn't in their realization of my success. It was in knowing that I had finally become who I was meant to be, not because of anyone else's validation, but because of my own. I stopped in front of the large window that overlooked the lot, watching the cars come and go. It was a simple moment, yet one that felt full of meaning. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic confrontations, no angry words. There was just me, standing in the place I had fought to build. I had taken what was mine, and in doing so, I had found a deeper sense of peace than I ever expected. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The family, the ones who had laughed at my old truck, had learned their lesson. They had seen me for who I was. They had seen the quiet strength that had always been there, buried beneath the years of ridicule and silence. And now they were left to reflect on their own actions, to confront the way they had dismissed me when I had only ever tried to give. They were humbled, though I knew that would take time to fully sink in. The weight of it all felt lighter. The weight of it all felt lighter. I had done what I set out to do, not to destroy, but to rise, to show that respect once given cannot be taken for granted, to show that even in the face of mockery, resilience can build something that lasts. As I walked through the dealership once more, I felt a quiet pride fill my chest. I had won, not by tearing anyone down, but by quietly standing tall in the face of all that had been thrown at me. The power was not in the business I had built. It was in the peace I had found within myself. The final chapter had closed, and the story had come full circle. What began in mockery, what started in betrayal, had transformed into something far more beautiful. It was a story of strength, of resilience, of a quiet man who found his voice when no one was listening. And in that silence, I found my triumph, a triumph that no one could take away.